In 1973, a woman named Dona Refugio sold cajeta from a copper cazo on the corner of Calle Madero in Celaya, Guanajuato. She had stirred goat milk over charcoal for 41 years. Her cajeta won first prize at the feria every year from 1958 through 1972. By 1979, a factory opened 2 blocks away and sold cajeta in jars for half the price. She could not compete. Her cazo went cold. That cajeta is number 11 on this list. Number 5 is an Aztec dessert older than the Spanish language. Number 9 required a technique where women balanced dough across their knees. Now, this is not medical advice, and I'm not telling you to change what you eat. These 25 desserts were in every kitchen, every fiesta, every quinceañera table. Subscribe and stay with me. Here are 25 forgotten Mexican desserts from the 1970s we need to bring back. Number 25, Capirotada, Mexican bread pudding for Lent. Stale bolillos are layered with a syrup made from piloncillo, the cheapest raw sugar available. Cinnamon sticks, whole cloves, raisins, peanuts, and then cheese. Queso fresco layered right in with the sweet bread. That combination of sweet bread and salty cheese is what separates Capirotada from every other bread pudding on earth. Each ingredient carried religious symbolism. The bread was the body of Christ. The syrup was His blood. The cloves were the nails. The cheese was the holy shroud. In Jalisco and Durango in the 1970s, every grandmother made Capirotada during the 40 days of Lent. The recipe was not written down. It did not need to be. You learned it by standing next to your grandmother at the stove. Today, younger people find the combination of cheese and sweet bread bizarre. The Lenten tradition has weakened. Capirotada is slowly becoming a dessert only the oldest members of the family remember how to make. Number 24, Dulce de calabaza, thick wedges of pumpkin dressed in a syrup of piloncillo, cinnamon, and water. That was your entire recipe. The pumpkin went into the pot raw with the piloncillo and a cinnamon stick. No butter, no cream, no oven, just heat and time. In central Mexico, dulce de calabaza appeared on every table from October through December. It was the dessert of Day of the Dead and the dessert of Christmas. The same pot fed both holidays because pumpkins were cheap and piloncillo was cheaper. In the mercados of Toluca and Pachuca in 1974, a plate of dulce de calabaza cost about 3 pesos. Your grandmother served it warm with a splash of milk poured over the top. That splash of cold milk against the hot syrup was the whole point. Nobody does that anymore. Nobody has the patience to simmer pumpkin for 3 hours when you can buy a packaged dessert in 10 seconds. Number 23, Camotes poblanos, convent sweet potato candies. Camotes poblanos are sweet potato candy from Puebla, invented by nuns in the colonial convents. Each flavor had a different color: green for lime, pink for strawberry, orange for guava, and white for pineapple. The tissue paper often stuck to the candy, and you had to peel it off carefully or the candy came apart. In Puebla's historic center, shops on Calle de los Dulces sold camotes from wooden trays behind glass counters. A box of 12 cost about 5 pesos in 1975. The sweetness was intense. 1 camote was enough. 2 was too many. The nuns who invented this recipe centuries ago understood something about sugar that modern candy makers have forgotten. Sweetness is better when it is concentrated, not diluted. 1 small, dense cylinder of sweet potato and lime juice has more flavor than an entire bag of factory candy. The old candy shops on Calle de los Dulces are closing one by one. The convents don't produce for sale anymore. Number 22, Chongos zamoranos, curdled milk, sugar, and cinnamon. That is it. Whole milk was heated with rennet until it curdled into soft white lumps. The texture was somewhere between custard and cheese. In Zamora, Michoacan, where this dessert originated, families used to make chongos every Sunday. The process took 4 hours of careful watching because if you stirred too hard, the curds fell apart. You had to let them float. In the 1970s, Clemente Jacques started canning Chongos zamoranos and selling them in supermarkets. The canned version made the homemade version obsolete almost overnight. Why spend 4 hours watching milk curdle when you can open a can? But the canned ones taste like syrup. The homemade ones used to taste like patience. The curds were softer, the cinnamon was deeper. Your grandmother's version sat on a plate. The factory version sits in a can. That difference is the whole story. Number 21, Nicuatole. Nicuatole is an ancient Oaxacan corn dessert made from corn masa, sugar, cinnamon, and water. The texture was unlike anything in European cooking. Not quite gelatin, not quite pudding. Nicuatole is over 500 years old. It predates the Spanish arrival. It was served at ceremonies and feasts long before sugar was added. The original version used only ground corn and water. In the 1970s, women in the mercados of Oaxaca still sold nicuatole from trays covered in banana leaves. A square cost about 2 pesos. You ate it with your hands. The corn masa left a faint sweetness on your fingers. Today, nicuatole is almost exclusively found in Oaxaca, and even there, it is becoming rare. The women who made it are aging out. Their daughters sell other things. An Aztec dessert that survived 500 years is disappearing, not because it failed, but because nobody is teaching it. Number 20, Jamoncillo de Leche. Fresh milk, sugar, and ground pecans or pine nuts were stirred over heat for 2 to 3 hours until the mixture thickened and could be poured into molds. It hardened into a dense, creamy fudge that crumbled slightly when you bit into it. The pecans gave it a richness that plain milk candy could not match. It came in small, rectangular blocks wrapped in wax paper and sometimes dusted with powdered sugar. Making jamoncillo required the same patience as making cajeta. You stood at the stove stirring for hours. If you stopped, the milk scorched. If you stirred too fast, the texture went wrong. In the 1970s, a block of jamoncillo at the Mercado in Monterrey cost about 4 pesos. Now you can buy something called Jamoncillo in a plastic wrapper at a checkout counter. It is not the same. What is missing is not an ingredient. It is the 2 hours of stirring. Number 19, Ante de almendras. A layered almond dessert from Puebla's convents. Almond paste made from blanched and ground almonds was layered with sponge cake soaked in a cinnamon syrup. The result was a rich, dense tower of almond cream and moist cake, served at quinceañeras, bodas, and baptisms. A single auntie used 2 kilos of almonds. The labor was enormous. In Puebla, in the 1970s, a few panaderias and convents still made ante de almendras for special orders. It cost about 50 pesos, which was expensive for the time. The dessert appeared at the most important moments of a family's life. The quinceañera table without an auntie was considered incomplete. Today, the panaderias that made ante de almendras have closed. The convents produce smaller batches for tourists, and the quinceañera table now holds a 3-tier fondant cake from a bakery chain. The almond tower has been replaced by frosting. Something changed in Mexican kitchens in the late 1970s. The generation of women who had spent their lives making these desserts by hand started to age out of the kitchen. They bought Jell-O from a box and canned Chongos from a supermarket shelf. Here is the thing, nobody blamed them. They were exhausted. They were working 2 jobs, raising children and maintaining a household. The handmade desserts that their mothers and grandmothers had produced were not lost to laziness. They were lost to modernity. When a woman works an 8-hour shift and comes home to cook dinner, she does not have time to grind almonds on a metate. The economy took the desserts away, not the appetite. Number 18, Cocada de horno, not the coconut candy made on the stovetop. This is the baked version. The edges caramelized and turned crispy. The center stayed creamy. A cocada de horno required fresh coconut, which meant someone had to crack the shell, drain the water, and grate the flesh by hand. In Colima and Guerrero in the 1970s, cocada de horno was the dessert that appeared at every church potluck and every family gathering. A whole cocada cost about 8 pesos to make. It fed 12 people. For a family contributing to a potluck, cocada de horno was the most generous dessert you could bring while spending the least money. The effort showed in the burns on the knuckles from the grater. Nobody bakes cocada de horno anymore because fresh coconut is the barrier. Nobody grates by hand anymore, and factory shredded coconut does not work the same. Number 17, Bunuelos de rodilla. The name tells you how they were made. De rodilla means on the knee. The dough, made from flour, eggs, and anise, was stretched paper thin over the cook's knee until it was translucent. Then it was fried in oil until it puffed and turned golden and crispy and drenched in a piloncillo syrup. Bunuelos appeared at Christmas and New Year's. The sound of breaking clay on New Year's Eve in Oaxaca was like fireworks made of dirt. In the 1970s, a bunuelo at a market stall cost about 2 pesos. The stretching technique took years to learn. Too aggressive and the dough tore. Too gentle and it stayed thick. The knee had to be floured. The motion had to be confident. Your grandmother could stretch a bunuelo so thin you could read a newspaper through it. That skill lived in her hands and died when they stopped working. Number 16, Arroz con leche de olla. Not the baked version, not the restaurant version with cinnamon sticks arranged on top for decoration. The po tea version. White rice simmered in milk with sugar, cinnamon, and sometimes raisins until the milk reduced, the rice swelled, and the whole pot turned into a thick, creamy, warm pudding. Your grandmother made it in a clay pot because she believed the clay changed the flavor, and she was right. The porous clay absorbed the milk and cinnamon over years of use until the pot itself was seasoned with dessert. Clay mattered. In the 1970s, arroz con leche was the dessert that ended every Sunday comida in Guadalajara and Morelia. A pot cost almost nothing to make: rice, milk, and sugar. 3 ingredients that every kitchen had. For a family with 7 children, arroz con leche was the great equalizer. Everyone got the same amount, ladled into the same bowls from the same pot. That's why you remember it, not because it was special, but because it was shared. Number 15, Gaznate de merengue, fried pastry tubes piped full of sweet meringue. The dough was made from flour, eggs, and a splash of mezcal or aguardiente. It was rolled paper thin, cut into rectangles wrapped around a wooden dowel, and fried until crispy. Then the dowel was slid out, and the hollow tube was filled with meringue, whipped from egg whites and sugar. In Oaxaca and Puebla, Gaznates appeared at quinceañeras, bodas, and fiestas. A dozen cost about 15 pesos in 1976. The challenge was humidity. If the air was damp, the tubes went soggy before you could fill them. Making Gaznates required dry weather and steady hands. Your grandmother could fill 12 tubes in 3 minutes without breaking one. That speed came from decades of practice. Today, Gaznates are almost exclusively found at specialty dulcerias in Puebla and Oaxaca. The skill of wrapping dough around a dowel and frying it to the exact right color exists in fewer hands every year. Number 14, Natillas, a milk custard stirred on the stove until it thickened, poured into a dish, and dusted with cinnamon, egg yolks, milk, sugar, cinnamon, and a pinch of cornstarch. That was the recipe. You stood at the stove and stirred for 20 minutes while the mixture slowly changed from liquid to cream. If you walked away, it burned. If you stirred too fast, it went lumpy. Natillas taught patience to every child who stood beside the grandmother and asked to help. The stirring was the lesson. In Michoacan and Jalisco in the 1970s, Natillas appeared after the Sunday meal when the children had been good. It was a reward. The children did not know it was cheap. That presentation turned 3 eggs and a liter of milk into an occasion. Nobody makes Natillas from scratch anymore because instant pudding exists and it costs nothing in time. But it costs everything in memory. These desserts were not luxury items. They were not the food of the rich. They were made from milk, sugar, corn, and whatever fruit was in season. The most expensive ingredient in most of them was time. 3 hours to stir cajeta, 4 hours for Chongos, 2 hours for Jamoncillo. That time was the recipe. Without it, the dessert does not exist. A factory can replicate the ingredients. It cannot replicate the standing, the stirring, the watching, the knowing when the color changes from pale to golden, when the texture shifts from liquid to paste. Now, here is what got lost: the knowledge of how something looks 1 minute before it is done. That knowledge lived in the eyes and the hands of the women who made these desserts. It was not written down because it could not be. How do you write down a color shift that happens over 3 seconds? You cannot. You learn it by standing next to someone who knows. Number 13, Cajeta de Celaya, the real version, not the jar from the supermarket. Goat milk, sugar, cinnamon, and a copper cazo. You stirred for 3 to 4 hours over a wood fire or charcoal. The milk darkened slowly from white to gold to amber to deep brown. The smell changed too, from fresh milk to caramel to something deeper, almost smoky. The copper cazo was not optional. The metal reacted with the sugar and the milk in a way that stainless steel could not replicate. In Celaya, Guanajuato, cajeta has been made this way since the colonial era. A jar of homemade cajeta cost about 10 pesos. Today, most cajeta is made in factories with cow milk and thickeners. The goat milk version takes longer and costs more. Your tongue knows the difference even if your brain does not. The factory version is sweet. The homemade version is rich. Sweet and rich are not the same thing. Number 12, alegrías con miel de abeja. Popped amaranth seeds pressed together with real honey into flat rectangular bars. The name means joys. This dessert is pre-Hispanic. The Aztecs mixed popped amaranth with blood to create religious figures. The Spanish banned the practice, but the food survived. By the 1970s, alegrías were sold in every mercado in central Mexico. The key was the honey. Real honey from real bees, not the corn syrup that factories started using when honey prices rose. An alegría made with real honey had a floral note that changed with the season because the bees fed on different flowers. In Tulyohualco, south of Mexico City, families have made alegrías for generations. A bar cost about 3 pesos in 1975. Today, most commercial alegrias use glucose syrup instead of honey. They hold together the same. They look the same on the shelf, but they do not taste like joy anymore. They taste like manufacturing, and your tongue knows the difference. Number 11, Muéganos de Puebla. Small balls of fried wheat dough stuck together with piloncillo syrup formed into a block the size of a fist. They originated in San Martin, Texmelucan, Puebla. The dough was simple: wheat flour, eggs, and a pinch of salt. The timing was precise. Too soon, and the block collapsed. Too late, and the sugar turned to glass that could cut your lips. In the mercados of Puebla and Tlaxcala in the 1970s, a muégano cost about 4 pesos. The best ones had a thin web of crystallized sugar between each ball that cracked when you pulled one off. Your teeth would stick together slightly from the piloncillo. That stickiness was the whole experience. Modern snacks dissolve. Muéganos resist. They make you work for every bite, and every bite is better for the effort. The women who made them in San Martin, Texmelucan are still there, but their children sell other things. Number 10, Dulce de Guayaba con queso. Sliced guava paste paired with a thick slice of queso fresco. Sweet and salty, dense and fresh. In the 1970s, you didn't buy guava paste. Your grandmother made it. Ripe guavas cooked with sugar for hours until the fruit broke down into a thick, dark, ruby red paste that could be sliced with a knife. She poured it into molds and let it cool. The paste kept for months. A wedge of homemade guava paste with a slice of queso panela was the after-school snack of every child in Aguascalientes and Querétaro. The factory-made guava paste you buy today in a plastic wrapper has been shortened with fillers and stabilizers. It is paler. It is softer. It does not have the concentrated guava intensity that your grandmother's version had because she used twice as much fruit and half as much sugar. Ate de membrillo, quince paste. The transformation was the miracle. A fruit that was inedible raw became one of the most intensely flavored sweets in Mexican cooking. The paste turned a deep reddish amber and had a fragrance that perfumed the kitchen for hours. In Michoacan and Querétaro in the 1970s, ate de membrillo was sold in wooden boxes lined with wax paper at mercados and bus stations. A box cost about 6 pesos. Travelers bought them as gifts because the paste traveled well and kept for weeks. Your grandmother served it sliced thin alongside queso manchego, and that combination of sweet fruit paste and sharp cheese was the dessert that ended every important dinner. Today, membrillo trees are less common. The fruit is hard to find, and the patience to cook it down for 3 hours has become rarer than the fruit itself. Number 8, empanadas de calabaza. Half-moon pastries filled with a sweet pumpkin and piloncillo mixture. The dough was made from flour, lard, and a pinch of salt. A spoonful of filling went into each round of dough. The edges were crimped with a fork. Then they were baked until golden or fried until crispy, depending on the region. In Chihuahua and Sonora, empanadas de calabaza appeared at every Christmas gathering. The women would make dozens at a time, assembly line style. One rolled the dough, one spooned the filling, one crimped and sealed, one watched the oven. It was communal cooking. The dessert required a team, and the team was the family. A dozen empanadas cost about 15 pesos in ingredients in 1976. For a family contributing to the Christmas table, that was nothing. Now, the women who formed the assembly line live in different cities. The team is scattered. And nobody makes empanadas de calabaza alone. Now, here is what nobody says about these desserts. They were not just food. They were events. Making cajeta meant a 4-hour commitment. Making bunuelos meant flour on the kitchen floor and oil popping on the stove. Making Ante de almendras meant the quinceañera was real and the family had invested in the celebration. The dessert was the proof that the occasion mattered. When a grandmother spent 3 hours stirring dulce de calabaza, she was not making a snack. She was saying, "This holiday is important enough to justify my time." That statement has disappeared from the modern kitchen because time is no longer given freely. It is calculated, measured, and spent in ways that can be tracked. You cannot track the value of 3 hours of stirring. You can only taste it. Number 7, marquesot, a tall, airy sponge cake made without butter or oil, only eggs, sugar, and flour. The EGGS were the key. The whites were beaten by hand until they formed stiff peaks, then folded into a batter with sugar and flour. The cake rose on nothing but trapped air. No baking powder, no leavening agent, just the strength of the arm that whipped the eggs. In Oaxaca and Guerrero, marquesotes were baked in clay molds and sold at mercados wrapped in paper. A marquesot cost about 5 pesos in 1975. The texture was dry, crumbly, and slightly sweet, designed to be eaten with coffee or hot chocolate. The cake lasted for days without going stale because it had no fat. For a senior on a pension, marquesota was the cheapest cake you could make. Eggs, flour, sugar, 3 ingredients. But the whipping took 30 minutes by hand, and your grandmother's right arm was always stronger than her left because of it. Number 6, caramuscas. Small caramel figures shaped into roosters, skeletons, crosses, and human forms, made from piloncillo and sugar, cooked to a precise temperature, then molded by hand. The caramuscas of Guanajuato were made by caramusqueros who have practiced this craft for over 200 years. The shapes told stories. A rooster meant dawn. A skeleton meant your ancestors were watching. A cross meant protection. In the 1970s, caramusqueros set up on the steps of the Alhóndiga de Granaditas in Guanajuato and sold their figures for about 2 pesos each. The best caramusqueros could shape a figure in under a minute because the sugar hardened fast. Every caramusquero had scars on his palms from the hot piloncillo. Families gave caramuscas as gifts during Day of the Dead, and children broke them open like small treasures. Today, fewer than 10 caramusqueros still work in Guanajuato. Their average age is over 65. The craft that survived colonization and revolution is losing its last practitioners to old age and economics. Number 5, cocoles de piloncillo, a dark, dense, sweet bread made with piloncillo, anise, and lard, shaped into diamond or leaf forms and baked until the crust cracked. Cocoles were the bread of the countryside. In Tlaxcala, Puebla, and the state of Mexico, village panaderias baked cocolos in wood-fired ovens before dawn. By 6 in the morning, the bread was warm and ready. The piloncillo gave the cocoles a deep, smoky sweetness that white sugar could not replicate. The anise gave them a fragrance that lingered. The lard made the crumb dense and satisfying. 1 cocol with a cup of café de olla was breakfast. In 1973, a cocol cost about 1 peso at the village panaderias. The village panaderias that used wood-fired ovens are closing. The bread they bake now uses gas ovens and refined sugar. The shape is the same. The name is the same. The taste is not. Number 4, polvorones de naranja, crumbly orange-flavored cookies made with lard, powdered sugar, flour, and the zest of fresh oranges. They fell apart in your mouth before you could chew them. That was the point. In Jalisco and Guanajuato, Polvorones de naranja were the cookie of Christmas and weddings. A tin full of them sat on every holiday table. Your grandmother would make 5 dozen at a time because they disappeared faster than any other cookie in the house. A batch cost about 10 pesos in ingredients in 1975. The orange zest had to be fresh. Dried zest did not work. The oils from a fresh orange peel mixed with the lard and created a flavor that commercial orange extract cannot match. When your grandmother grated an orange over the dough, the kitchen smelled like Christmas morning. Nobody zests fresh oranges into cookie dough anymore. The commercial extract is faster. Faster is not better. Number 3, gelatina de leche con cajeta. Milk gelatin layered with homemade cajeta. The cajeta layer went on top, sometimes mixed into its own gelatin, sometimes drizzled in a ribbon through the center. When you sliced into the mold, the layers appeared. White milk and dark gold cajeta in stripes. In the 1970s, gelatina de leche con cajeta was the dessert of every birthday party and every Sunday dinner in Guanajuato, Jalisco, and Michoacan. Every grandmother had her own mold. Some used bunt molds, some used loaf pans, some had elaborate copper molds shaped like fish or flowers. The gelatin took on the shape and became a centerpiece. A gelatina cost about 8 pesos in ingredients and fed 10 people. It was the most generous dessert per peso in Mexican cooking. Today, people buy pre-made gelatin cups from convenience stores. The molds collect dust. The layers have disappeared into single flavors. Number 2, leche quemada. Fresh milk, sugar, and fire. Burnt milk. The name describes the process, and the process describes the patience. In Nuevo Leon and Coahuila, leche quemada was the candy of every rancho and every kitchen with a wood-burning stove. A batch used an entire gallon of milk and a full kilogram of sugar to produce maybe 30 small squares. In 1975, a bag of leche quemada from a market in Monterrey cost about 5 pesos. The candy stuck to your teeth and tasted like caramel, but deeper, with a slight bitterness from the browning. Your grandmother would cut it into squares with a knife dipped in butter so it would not stick. She made it when she had milk that was about to turn, because the philosophy of waste nothing and use everything was what built this candy. That philosophy built half the desserts on this list. Number 1, Cajeta de Celaya de Cazo de Cobre, the original, not the factory jar. Goat milk from a local herd, piloncillo instead of white sugar, a copper cazo that had been in the family for 3 generations. A woman stood over a charcoal fire stirring for 4 hours without stopping. That was the recipe. She knew by sound. The bubbling changed pitch. She knew by smell. The caramel shifted from sweet to deep. She knew by feel. The spoon dragged differently through the milk at exactly the right moment. None of that knowledge is written in any cookbook. Each jar represented 4 hours of standing, stirring, and knowing. The line outside her door on Saturday mornings stretched down the sidewalk. People came from Irapuato and Salamanca because her cajeta was better. Today, a factory in Celaya produces 10,000 jars a day. The factory cajeta is consistent. It is affordable. It is the same every time. And every jar is missing the one ingredient no factory can add: 4 hours, the copper cazo, and the woman who knew the sound. Make one of these this season, just one. Buy a kilo of piloncillo and simmer a pumpkin. Whip some egg whites into peaks for a marcasote. Grate a fresh coconut for cocada de horno. Pick the one your grandmother made and make it the way she made it. Not from a box, not from a can, from a pot, from a comal, from a hand that remembers. Because these desserts did not disappear because people stopped craving them. They disappeared because the hands that made them stopped working, and the only way to bring them back is to learn. Ask your grandmother for the recipe while there is still time. If she is still here, stand next to her and watch. If she is not, find someone who carries the same knowledge. Tell me in the comments which of these 25 desserts brings back a memory. Tell me which one sat on your quinceanera table. I want to know if the cajeta gets more love than the capirotada. I want to know if anyone else's grandmother could stir a copper cazo for 4 hours without sitting down. Because somewhere in these 25 desserts is a flavor that belongs to you. And a dessert someone stirred for 3 hours is worth more than anything in a plastic wrapper. These recipes deserve to live.